Uganda Matters University. He has his PhD in Peace and Conflict Studies at the University for Peace in Costa Rica. He also has a postgraduate diploma in environmental studies from the Center for International Postgraduate Studies of Environment Management of Dresden University of Technology in Germany. He's a recipient of the prestigious Alexander von Humboldt Foundation's International Climate Protection Fellowship 2018. He's also the Dean of and lecturer in the School of Arts and Social Sciences. His last publication is Environmental Economies, Survival Ecologies, and Economic Interests in Pastoral Uganda, the Justice Question in the Social and Environmental Governance of Pastoral Resources of Karamoja. You're welcome, Dr. Benedicto. Dr. Frank Emmanuel Muhereza is the current Executive Director of the Center for Basic Research headquartered in Kololo, Kampala, and a Research Associate with the Makerere Institute of Social Research. Dr. Muhereza holds a BA, or Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Makerere University, a Diploma in Development Studies from the University of Cambridge, and his PhD is from Makerere University. An MPhil from Makerere University, Social Studies, the PhD in Social Studies again, Political Economy and Political Studies from the Makerere Institute of Social Research. He further has immense research and consultancy expertise in armed conflict analysis, particularly post-conflict reconstruction and DDR interventions with field experience in South Sudan, LRA-affected northern Uganda, Karamaja, Kenya's Turkana and Pokot regions, and Somalia. Dr. Muhereza was the chief consultant in the region in the design of the Karamaja Integrated Disarmament and Development Program, the KIDDP from 2005 to 2007. His doctoral thesis, titled The Transformation of Karamaja, Sedentarization of Pastoralists, sums up Dr. Muhereza's scholarship on this Karamoja question. His latest publication is titled Livestock-Centered Diversification and Livelihood Recovery in Post-Disarmament Karamoja. I hope I've done justice to your very great profiles and that you're happy with that. If I've missed anything, please feel free to say that. Please let's keep the chat section very active. When we open up the flow to the rest of us, we will pick up from that. Or at the moment when I am moderating, I will be also taking one or two ideas from time to time, one or two questions from all of you who make contributions, from some of you make contributions, so that we can have a more engaging and fruitful conversation. I would like to request that the panelists keep their videos on so that we can fully engage. Yeah. So, we have structured our conversation this way. We will have 10 minutes of introduction to the issues, some sort of summary and an attempt to answer the key questions related to the Karamoja questions from your scholarly works. So each of our participants will have 10 minutes each. I would like to keep it that brief so that we can have more time for engagement and with myself as well as with persons who are on the call. And there will be about 30 minutes of counter engagement between the doctors. And after that 30 minutes, we will have 45 minutes of discussion, especially with those who are present. And after that 45 minutes, engagement with all of us. We will have 10 minutes, 5 for each of our debaters, and we'll get into the concluding session in the last 5 minutes. I hope this come to 120 minutes and not 130. We'll try as much as possible to keep time. So let's get right in. I would toss a coin, but I don't wish to do that. I would like to have Benedicto Cabito have his first 10 minutes. Thank you. Kindly keep time. And your mic is muted, Doctor. Yeah. Dr. Cabito.
Yeah, finally, thank you very much. I had some technical challenges here. I couldn't unmute myself. Simon, it's a pleasure seeing you again after some time. And yes, I'm happy to be part of this conversation. I would like to particularly thank the chair for the center, Dr. David Simba, who happens to be, by the way, my colleague in many ways. We did our masters together here at Uganda Matters University, and we have seen each other through our academic journeys and battles going forward. In a special way, I would like to welcome Dr. Muhereza Frank. And I have some special attachment to you, Doctor, though I haven't met personally, because you were one of the persons I met when I began engaging in Karamoja, though I met you only online. Through your work you published in 1998. That is the work you published with the Culture Survival Quarterly magazine. And that's where I first interfaced with Karamoja, the Karamoja Question going forward. That said, my first interfaces with Karamoja were when I was a child in my primary school, where we came to know about Karamoja as a scary land, as a land impossible, as a land less desirable, as a land to avoid. As I grew up, I had some special interest in interacting and knowing and working with people from the northern part of the country. And that chance never came, especially with Karamoja, until 2009, when I had my first trip in the region. And then I had to go all the way to Kanawat Parish, among the Kombonis. My stay there taught me two things. One, to accept living in scarcity but happily. Second, to understand that life is about perseverance and making happiness out of what you have, other than expecting it in dimensions that could be hard for you to reach out to. In my stay there, I stayed there around 3 months. I saw children who would play the whole day and go back home only to have one meal. And they would play the whole day happy. It is then that I made a commitment that my life should be for this region in whichever circumstances I should find myself in. And I remember when I came back from my master's here at Uganda Matters University, I used to make good jokes about Karamoja, and I had that positive outlook of Karamoja. And because of that, when a project was brought to Uganda Matters University, which required an academic to work in Karamoja, my head of department then just pointed at me and said, "This is your thing. Who else should go to Karamaja other than you?" And that's when I saw myself back to Karamoja in 2013. Karamoja as a land and Karimojong as a people, for me, constitutes the future of Uganda. And I've always said this, that Karamoja is the future of this country. It is the future of this country because of the potentials, because of the resilience of the people, but because that's the only way we can undo the injustices and the marginalization and the prejudices we have casted onto this region. So this is what is behind my interest and my love and my association with Karamoja. I'm happy that one of the persons who academically oriented me into the knowledge of the region is here with us. And that gives me joy deep down to the core of my heart. I'm impressed with this. Simon, I think this will be part of the major discussion. I will not go into it, but I wanted to briefly give the picture of Karamoja, but let me leave this to the more allocated time for the discussion because it is already in my PowerPoints. With that, I thank you once again, Simon. Thank you for the work you do for the region and for the country. And I'm more than happy having more conversations of this kind and joining with Dr. Muhereza and among others, of course, to advance the cause of the region and for national building. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Benedicto Cabito. What I would like to take you back on is to give us the crux of your thesis, from your scholarly work, method, conclusions, claims, evidence. Okay, now I give you 5 because you have done justice to the introduction as well. I just would like to give you just a bit of time to do that so that we can have this conversation. Thank you. Benedicto, can you unmute? Yes.
Yeah, I think I do suggest that for panelists, we are left with that liberty to unmute and mute with ease. Otherwise, it becomes quite challenging.
Yes.
Simon
Please.
and the audience listening from far and near, my research project at a PhD level was interested in understanding how culture, pastoral resources, and the gun interplay to influence the expression of violence in Karamoja. And this research was based on two grounds, 2 pillars. One, the realization that conflict and violence in particular have been associated to the very nature of humanity. It is understood as a lifetime project of humanity, which has defined humanity, including the rise and fall of civilizations. Wars are known to be inherent in human endeavors and conflict to be embedded in human activities. That's on one hand. The second motivating factor for my research was the perpetual and perennial castigation of Karamoja as culturally violent, basing on the expressions of violence and conflict exhibited in cattle raids, for example, road ambushes, and the fear of insecurity in this region that pushed many people away from this region. So, on one hand, conflict and violence are associated to the very nature of every human being. And if that must be the case, why should a Karimojong man or youth or woman, for that matter, be seen to be more pro-violence? And if they are culturally violent, do we have evidence to that effect? I am actually working on that specific research project to have a basis upon which you can categorize a culture or a practice or a human behavior as culture, whether violent or non-violent, or traditional, whether violent or non-violent, or deviant, for that matter. So plotting it against or across these 3 concepts or conceptual maps in a way could give a very clear picture of whether we are being prejudiced, we are casting prejudices, or we are actually basing on a reality informed by experience, observation, and theory to be right on our conclusions and assertions. So my study, looking at these three concepts of culture, pastoral resources, and the gun, used, of course, a qualitative research approach. In this research approach, I was being aided by an outlook of a multifaceted theoretical framework, which is set out to, first of all, understand the understanding and explanation of what violence is and what causes it from a variety of theories. I actually have them in my slides. And these theories that were used were, for example, the conflicts theory. This can as well be associated with the structural violence theory of Galtung. This is limited in a way that it looks at the potential causes of violence to always be material. So it doesn't go into the ideas and ideals of what would motivate conflict. And upon reviewing it, I realized we need to get to theories that provide for what Rommel calls a comprehensive understanding of conflict. And he says that understanding should be encompassing of all disciplines of theory and observation and practice, of morality and ethics, of observation, theories and hypotheses, of reflection and experience. So I sought to look for a little more advanced theories. These are the anthropogenically informed theories of explanation of conflict. And under those, you have theories that, as much as they recognize that material needs could be motivation for conflict, they realize that, for example, if you go for theories like the human needs theory, the biological theories of conflict, the realist theories of conflict, they attach more potential to elements that are eliminated by the conflict theory to be potential grounds for conflict. For example, the biological theory of conflict looks at the genetically motivated impulses of individuals to be pro-conflict. The realistic theory of conflict looks at a human nature as being naturally weak, as being defect. And of course, this is informed by the theological doctrines of the weakness of human nature, as well as the biological inclinations of saying we are naturally pro-violence, to say that conflicts are defects or are outcomes of defects of human nature. When you look at the human needs theory, which says, unlike the two, that actually it is only human needs that motivate or constrain people to get violent, or it is these that motivate behavior, whether positive or negative. So for them, they say human nature has nothing to do with influencing how one behaves, but their needs, the best ones and those the higher hierarchy needs. But most importantly, I realized the integrated—
Can we get Doctor to the findings and evidence, because we are really running out of time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. Yeah, you realize
if David could enable the PowerPoint, maybe that makes it easier to get ahead of time.
Okay, I have the PowerPoint here with me. I think I can share it later on when that time comes. So my conclusions, very briefly, you realize we need a day to discuss Karamoja. But very briefly,
yes,
my conclusions on the three concepts talk about the pastoral resources. Pastoral resources have always been blamed, even both in literature and by some flocks on the ground, to be the motivating factor, that when they have less resources, they're motivated to get into raids. But what was very interesting and quite controversial to most of the literature, the understanding that scarcity of resources is the driving factor was being put in question by some findings, where you realize that if you have raids that were sanctioned by elders traditionally, these raids would be pro-resource distribution, especially in times of pandemics, and when livestock has been lost to either a raid or a natural cause. So these raids were pro-resource distribution, and these were sanctioned. They were motivated by elders. But most of the raids, especially the most violent ones, and the ones which have been experienced in the past 30, 40 years, most of these were either economically motivated or exploitative tendencies among some rich people who took advantage of the poor youth. They used them for self-enrichment. But also, traditionally, where raiding was a practice and a pride exercise of warriors, it wasn't motivated by scarcity, but by abundance. Because it used to happen during the end of the rain season, when communities were heavy with food, when the youth were strong because they've been feeding well. So they wanted to show pride and that exposure of being a warrior. So on that resource dimension, there is a limitation to which resource scarcity should be blamed for violence in the region. Just to be brief. When you go to the gun, for me, this was the most interesting bit of the three concepts. Guns first reached Karamoja in around 1890s. This is before colonialism. Especially the GA, those colleagues of mine in Kotido, when I went to Kotido, I was given a name Lothike, so I treasure them. These colleagues of mine, the GA, had already access to guns from the Beridian Congo. The Beridians were already trading with them through their Chori land, and they already had access to guns. And that's why the G were the first ones to be feared. And I think that also contributes to the name. G means a warrior. But even then, guns were not that much a tool of violence.
Maybe just to clarify, just so you don't get attacked immediately, G actually doesn't mean warrior. It's a sub-ethnic name, which is not related to violence in any way. Yeah.
But I understand it's one of the 14 communities across the region.
Yes.
But there are also literature which associates the term as relating to being a warrior.
I would say those are mischaracterizations.
Those are characterizations.
Yes.
All right, I'll take it at that. So getting to the gun dynamics, there are sources of literature, including Muhereza, 1998, which shows that guns in the region were estimated to be around 150,000. That's for Muhereza. For other sources, it's between 30,000 and 300,000. But what is, for me, more of interest is the number provided by the Ministry of Defense in early 2000s, where they thought or they predicted that the region had around 30,000 guns. So if you have around 30,000 guns in a region of around 1 million people, you have 1 gun per 30 people. No, actually, it is less than that. But my big question is, if you have 30,000 guns in a population of around 1 million people, what would be the percentage of the population that would hold guns? And would that percentage of the people with guns qualify the whole population as a culture of guns and therefore a culture of violence, if you're looking at gun violence? For me, that was quite an interesting observation. Second is the realization that many authors across the board will associate gun violence and its introduction to the region according to very key junctures. For Ochen, 1993, it is 1890s from the Beridian Congo. For other authors, they will either plot it around 1979, when Amin's government was falling and the Moroto barracks was abandoned, Others will associate it to around 1940s, 1960s, especially after the Second World War. Yet other sources will associate it to 1911. And I think even Muhereza in his work notes that when traders from Abyssinia, from Nairobi, from Ethiopia and elsewhere, were using guns to both hunt, but as well to sell them in exchange for cattle. Of course, we are aware that Karimajong sometime also got into the culture and the practice of making guns, but this was on a small scale. But surprising that for the origins of the guns, those cultures are not cultures of guns. But for those who are recipients and victims of guns, they become cultures of guns. I think that's a double standard in my view, and that's quite a prejudice. On culture,
Dr. Capito, may you wrap up in a minute. I know there will be a lot of time to get back to some of your findings and conclusions. Kindly wrap this round in a minute.
Lastly, on culture, my study showed that you can plot human behavior, even on a societal scale, according to levels of motivation for these actions across levels of constraint. Vis-a-vis this, you can also plot these practices from whether they are internally inspired or internally motivated, that's from individuals, or externally motivated, that's from a society. And if they are internally motivated, then you don't blame them on a culture because they belong to an individual. If they're externally motivated, then they belong to a culture because a culture or a society motivates them. And this happens in the reverse order if you consider constraint. So internal constraints are constraints and controls of an individual, yet the external ones are of a culture. So in the event, like we already informed, in the event that cattle raiding and violence and associated practices were blessed by the elders, in those incidences, you can associate it to a culture. But even when a segment of a population that does this is smaller, if, for example, it's 10% or below 20%, it would be quite a prejudice to target on a culture. This will be pretty much a tradition. A tradition is a practice that is embraced by a section of a community and practices over a period of time and can be transferred to those that generation chooses as the rightful custodians of that practice. So cattle raiding borders between being a tradition, a subculture, and a deviance, depending on who are involved, what are the motivation and constraints around them. Thank you very much, Simon. You know, you can't discuss Karamoja in just a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I understand that very, very well. You wouldn't even finish that in a day. Yes, let's give Dr. Muhereza, and knowing him is also probably going to take as much time as Dr. Kabito, but we will not allow that. 15 minutes, starting now. Thank you.
Thank you, Alagaranoi. Egapolon Simon. Toyakadia. Era ekakiro Muhereza Emmanuel Frank Lopeyok apa lokoriteba.
Okay. Alagaranoi. So he's mentioning some Karamojong names.
Thank you. I've read many things. If anything is written about Karamaja, I try to read it in order to be able to understand it. One of the pieces which I have read recently, which is really captivated my mind, which I would like to read over and over, is there are 3 dissertations on Karamoja, PhD dissertations. And the PhD dissertation is a work which a person writes over a period of 3 to 5 years. And it is difficult to really do justice to the issues stated in there, but it's a good opportunity for me to engage with my colleague, Dr. Kabito. I'm really very thrilled to find that people read and follow what we do. I have been doing research and studying Karamoja since 1990. Everything else I have done outside of that has been for very opportunistic reasons. So I pretty much try to follow the debates. I pretty much try to follow the policy discourses. And so for me, I'm not going to go into a lot about the conceptual, theoretical underpinnings. I want to map out a debate around the development dilemma in Karamoja. And the title of this discussion was about the discourse on agro-pastoral contestations as the Karamoja question. That in itself for me is very problematic because what is the question in Karamoja? Is it a question of agro-pastoralism versus other paths to development? Is it about the law and order, which is security? Or is it something else? If you want to be able to appreciate what is going on in Karamoja, and I really appreciate my colleague, Dr. Kabito, for citing some of the writings we were writing in the 1990s when we were learning to write. And our views have shifted on some of these issues and the emphasis that we put on some of these issues. To put it into perspective, for me, I think that anybody who wants to appreciate the challenge that Karamoja as a problematic presents for us is to understand that Karamoja is that problematic is a moving target. It's a moving target. You need concrete understanding, of the complexities of its changing dynamics. You solve one problem, you create another completely different problem. It's a moving target, a problematic. But despite that, there are a number of fundamentals around which we need to have some understanding and build arguments in order to be able to, break it down. You need a strategy in order to understand this that allows you to combine several different but mutually reinforcing proximate as well as underlying factors in order for you to say, now that is the problem. And this problem is because of the complexity. You will not be able to say, I think this is the problem, this is not the problem. There is a way in which they keep mutually reinforcing each other. I set out in 2014, around there, 13 maybe, to do a PhD, to write a PhD dissertation and to a proposal to do research. And what I wanted to know was, why is it difficult for all that has been done for there to be a sustainable positive impact on the basis of which you build in order to improve the livelihoods in a sustainable manner? And then I asked myself, every direction you took, you found a brick wall in terms of the explanations. And we have to go back to history and map this out and understand whether understanding what happened in the past can help us to unravel the challenges of the present in order to understand where the future is taking us in the future. And you realize that you need a lot of resources around tracing the relationship between the Karamojong and the various forms of state. And so I said, okay, I know these are important. Let me focus on the development debates and particularly look at development policy as it takes place in Karamoja. And for suppositions in order for my arguments to coalesce around the current period of the NRM. Looking at everything that they had done between 1986 and 2010, 2011, it was very clear for me then that most of it would be very difficult for the transformation that was desired to be achieved if the development paradigm and the development trajectories in Karamoja were going to be pursued in the way in which they are being constructed at that time. And following the passing of the Karamoja food security policy in 2009, there was a deliberate effort to try and address the problem of ensuring that households have access to food. Other people call it food insecurity, to deal with the food security issue, address food insecurity. At the same time, in order for you to be able to do that, to address the law and order problem in Karamoja, in order to make it possible for development to take place. So now, the NRM government is defined the problem of Karamoja in three ways, which are mutually related. One, a law and order problem. And that is a definition of the Karamoja problem, which dates back since the colonial period. The second is to understand the problem of Karamoja as a development problem. See, when you define the Karamoja problem as a law and order problem, the solution is to try and address the factors that you think cause law and order: culture, infrastructure of law and order enforcement, increase security presence, increase, investing. Now, if you define the problem as a development problem, then the solution, after you settle the law and order problem, becomes bring development, more development. Take roads, electricity, safe water, schools. Development is defined in terms of social amenities and access to basic social services that increase the standards of living as defined in other parts of the country. But there is also another way in which what the NRM was doing understood the problem of Karamoja as being, which they didn't do much about. That is to look at the problem of Karamoja as a political question. You're going to do everything you're going to do about the people and what they want and how they want to achieve in the manner which is for everybody inclusive, not for a few who have the benefit of being in positions that make it possible for them to access resources. I chart out my arguments, 10 different arguments, but starting from an understanding of what the NRM government has been doing and how that is different from what the previous governments were doing, in order for me to be able to chart out a way that helps to isolate exactly what the problem is and how this can be dealt with in the contemporary society of Uganda. There are very, very few who write dissertations, but very few people who tackle the present, because the present is very difficult. And this is what we try to do, and try to understand the present. Okay, because this is a discussion and we would like really for people to help us to understand and to join us in this discourse and debate. Let me give you a few anecdotal information which is consistent with my arguments. I returned from Karamoja last night. I'd spent there 4 weeks. And we went to districts, but let me give you one. Napak district. Napak district is 60% in the green belt areas of Karamoja on the western side. So which means that they can grow food if the physical conditions allow. The cow, the official statistics given to us by the cow on the basis of letters that have been received through the disaster management committees is that 50% of the population is already looking for food assistance and written to the district for assistance in terms of food. 2 years, 2020, 2021, Karamoja has suffered severe prolonged drought with rain appearing when it is least expected and most of the rain out of the crop growing season. So you have extended rain outside of the traditional growing season when the crops are supposed to be growing. And for the first part of the year when the rains were received, they came in flash floods. So those areas in the west that had a significant crop that had been planted lost all the crop and most of it was washed away. So you have natural factors, climatic change affecting Karamoja in very real terms. And now for all the investment that has gone, you still have 50% of the population in a district acutely food insecure. That means that there is some problem with the roads, with the electricity, with the water, which is a very good thing. We still have a challenge before us. Is it the way we have defined the development problem of Karamoja, and therefore we are shooting a moving target, and every time we think that we have shot, the problem continues to manifest in a completely different way. Insecurity in Karamaja has been happening. 2010 July, His Excellency the President announced the success of disarmament and declared that the absent state of Uganda had returned to Karamoja, and with it, the solution to the law and order problem in Karamoja. Starting in 2018, 2019, a lot of laxity, many things that did not happen that were supposed to have happened. And we've had the unfortunate problem of going through an election that is from around October when the campaign, September, October when the campaign started, 2020 up to January 2021. Every time you have an election in Karamoja, there is a sense in which lapses in the security setting take place, which make it possible for communities to continue to reorganize. So you have an insecurity that they are dealing with, which means the law and order challenge that we are addressing or trying to come to terms with in Karamoja is continuously morphing. And now we have to go back to the drawing board and address these issues. So for me, the most critical and worthwhile engagement in such a debate is to try and get to terms with the dilemmas of the current development dispensation in Karamoja, and that is a project I have and all the writings we have endeavored to try and come to terms with through research that we do. I work with Center for Basic Research. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frank Muheresa Lopeyok. Apa, eh?
Apa lokoriteba.
Apa lokoriteba. Our bulls must look a bit alike. Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Kabito and Muheresa for that. Very interesting. I've seen a lot of conversation on the chat, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more questions when we open up space for our participants. What do each of you take away from the other's scholarship? I mean, what are your key takeaways, Benedicto, from the work that Muheresa has done? And now, does that sort of reframe, if it does, your understanding of the Karamoja question, especially in consideration of your work? And that was the same question to Frank Muheresa. How does Dr. Kabito's work help you reframe or better understand the problem, the Karamoja problem, I think there is such a thing, at least in academic cycles. Dr. Benedicto, you have 5 minutes for that.
Yeah,
and
thank you very
Fang
much.
I'll get another 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Simon, for that question and for guiding the debate going forward. It's very clear that, especially in his PhD, Dr. Muhereza focused more on the more current, should I say, developments and interventions, especially of the current government. And I think this is informed by the fact that he had been long in the region. He has researched around it quite for a long period of time. And in his mind, presence, and practice, he wants to provide a solution from an academic perspective to the challenges he sees. And I think that in a way defines our departure points of focus, whereby he focuses on developmental paradigms and discourses, especially as being driven by the NRM government. Yet my focus was getting to the conceptual, theoretical, and practical understanding of the concepts that we use to refer to the region and the people. So in a way, you realize these two studies are reinforcing each other, because even development itself, conceptually and practically, should base on a given history. So my work tries to give context to the understanding of the region, and his is trying to see how this context being provided can best be, in a way, informative in the development discourses. Actually, in my slides, I also get to the Karamoja question, and I have 7 points which define the contestations and the question of Karamoja. And in his research, he focuses on the law and order problem, which is a security and a political problem, as well as a development problem, which is also very central in my identification of the Karamoja question and question and contestations. What I should say more is that Dr. Muhereza helps me, as a person who has been long in the region, to make that link between the past and the present. And pretty much of this has been captured in the recent paper I've written, which was also to a big extent informed by his work. But in the most important way, Dr. Muhereza's focus in developmental discourses is not something that begins with the NRM. We are aware that the colonial and post-colonial governments, for the entire time they were in operation, they have all the enacted policies that have been constraining development of Karamoja, imposing control over the region, and proposing alternative paradigms of development instead of complementary paradigms of development. And I think this is the concern that Dr. Muhereza focuses on, with keen focus on NRM. So for me, this is a study that enriches the way we understand the region, and these two studies inform each other and complement each other in a big way.
So, okay, there is complementarity. Your take, Muhereza.
Mahmoud Mamdani, in defining what the problem of colonialism, talks about bifurcated state, citizen and subject. The state was bifurcated in the sense that there was a section of the colonial population where the civil law was applicable, where we had political rights, and another section where the native law and didn't have any political rights. Anybody who was recruited as a chief in the service of the colonial state had only certain rights without any political rights. So he says the state was bifurcated. It is not true for anybody to say, I do not anchor any arguments in history. I don't just do a history of Karamoja for the sake of it. I focus on the history of development. And that is a history. I know we have so many historians who would understand the difference between history and the history of culture and the history of development. When the colonials, one of the main arguments I make is that Karamaja is the only part in this world where the British accepted defeat, acknowledged the defeat, and went on to implement reforms as a consequence of accepting defeat. I also make several arguments that both the NRM government shares a lot in terms of the way they look at the problem of Karamoja. They understood the Karamojong as having a fetishism for cattle. They love cattle for the sake of cattle, that they want them numbers, they cherish them, they worship them. But the way the fetishism of the cattle was instrumentalized in the colonial period varies with the way in which it is instrumentalized during the NRM period. While the colonial state instrumentalized the cattle fetishism of the Karamojong by commodifying the cattle, in 1935, Karamoja had generated close to 500,000 pounds in savings in the British Exchequer, and that is my dissertation. The NRM government was never interested in the commodification. They instrumentalized the cattle fetishism of the Karamojong for purposes of political control. I am interested in culture in Karamoja, but not culture for the sake of culture in the way in which it is understood. My interest in culture is to understand how the state reorders society, how the state tries to invent society and uses culture as an entry point. I will explain. When Mamdan talks about bifurcated state, one of the things which the colonial state succeeded in doing was to craft a culture. The colonial state wanted to control the Karamojong and invent a new culture by appointing chiefs, by restricting movements, by defining when you move to the grazing area, by defining how you live your life, how the Karamojong live their life. And they resisted, leading to the native rebellion where Chief Achia was murdered. Now, what happens thereafter? The colonial state decides and says, as long as the Karamojong will not touch any of our colonial officials, we will let them be. And that begins the policy, the deliberate colonial policy of isolation, marginalization, and exclusion. Now, in interpreting what that means theoretically, Mamdan terms it as a bifurcated state. We forget that by accepting defeat, the colonial government let the tribal war machine to thrive, the tribal governance system to eclipse whatever system they put in place. In order for us to understand what is happening to the present, we need to make connections with what has already happened and understand what went wrong. The NRM government, in trying to disarm the Karamojong.
Dr. Frank, you have 1 minute to conclude on that. Sorry.
So, I agree that we need to be a bit historical, which we try to do, but not for the sake of citing history of Karamoja. We cite history that is relevant to make our argument on the development failure in Karamoja. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. It looked in that response like the differences between both your approaches and focus got a bit clearer. To me, I don't know if Kabito thinks the same. You know, this disagreement over the place of history in the Karamoja problem. Yeah, and I don't know how much currency both of you give that or allocate that in terms of, you know, the problems that Karamaja faces. Are we giving it 20%? Are we giving history 30%? Or is culture and tradition 50%? Your take, guys, I really would like to know from you, and I think some of our participants as well.
Simon, that is the wrong question to be asking me. Maybe Carito will have an opportunity to respond.
I mean, to be honest, my thesis is, and I don't have a PhD for that, it's just here, is that the moment you consider a problem, cultural or traditional, you disarm yourself of options or alternatives to deal with that. And I would say it is unempowering to the person seeking a solution to a problem, let alone calling it a problem. You know, when Mamdani, wrote that paper, which I've read years ago, what is the Karamaja problem? He went deep into history and the place of history in that problem. So this is really why I wanted to have that answer from both of you. Frank says that's not a good question. Dr. Kabito, what's your take?
Simon, do you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. I don't know whether I'll answer you the way you want or the way you have asked. I'm trying to having a challenge here.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Well, I wanted to project
as he fixes.
Okay, as he tries to project, whenever you are ready, you can alert me and I can stop. For me, I think culture is very relative, and to try and use it as an argument to explain current phenomenon is because it is also one of those which is instrumentalized in order to achieve political objectives as well as other objectives. They could be economic, they could be, different. It is important for us to understand how the relationship between the Karamojong and the state were understood, both from the colonial period and the post-colonial period. It is important for us to try and come to terms with that. And when you try to do that, it doesn't make that argument cultural. No, it doesn't, not at all. Okay, I can see. Yeah, sure, Kabito, you can go on.
Yes, thank you, Frank.
Simon, to your question, that is directly related to what Muhereza already hinted on, that if we have a question, what is the answer? And he tried to point at what would be the responses to that question. As I had informed already, I'm seeing 7 major areas that define the question of Karamoja, which is geospatial, you may call it ecological, which is the land, space, home identity nexus, whereby the way Karimajong as a people see themselves is not how the rest of the country sees them, and Karamoja as a geographical space, but also as a political entity, does not have the same right of say, the same self-identity feel like the rest of the country, well perceptional contestations, including stereotypes, prejudices, and things like that. We have the social cultural elements where there is, of course, an attachment to cattle. You can call it cattocentrism, placing cattle at the center of survival because the ecology in which you survive can only allow that. Of course, they are political and the rest. Now, my study didn't use history and culture for the sake of it. And my theoretical framework, together with the understanding of the practices, the perceptions around them, was meant to redefine the understanding of Karamoja. That in itself should be part of seeking solutions, whether developmental or otherwise. And my conceptual framework, especially using my theoretical framework, especially using the integrated model of explaining violence, looks at 4 sources of what informs a judgment over a behavior or a practice. These properties or processes can be regarded as internally motivated or externally motivated, internally constrained or externally constrained. And I believe that can help us to be right when we are judging people and practices, and we don't get stereotyping and prejudiced. And I think for me that is very important to even social development of the region. We are aware that Karamoja was once not only a closed region, but also referred to as a human zoo. These kind of mentalities must be deconstructed by reconstructing perceptions through conceptual and theoretical reconstructions and reflections. So my study itself, if you ask me, is very fundamental in doing this. And using the theoretical framework I used, I have a visual image of what can be a guiding compass of what may qualify as a cultural behavior practice, traditional, generational, subcultural, all deviant to that matter. So if you ask me, for me, this is very key to question the things we are used to, the prejudices, the stereotypes. So history, the understanding of culture, and plotting it across dimensions of theory and conceptualization is very key to understanding the problem of Karamoja and seeking solution. So it takes a reasonable percentage in what must be factored in to seeking solutions of the region and of the country, to national building. Thank you. I want to give you the percentage, 10, 15, 20, I want to give you that. But I know it significantly matters. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, it's that time in this debate when we open it up to our other participants. May you stop sharing screen? Thank you. Yes, I have a lot of questions here on this chat. I don't know if I don't know if you have been following Frank and Benedicto, and I would just say we can go through these questions and not open the chat, but we can also take questions from the participants so that we can give more context. Can I see some hands? I've seen Ronald Senat. May you give Ronald Senat a chance? So can I just ask you to unmute? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, the moderator. And thank you, Dr. Kabito and Mohereza. This debate this afternoon is a very interesting one. A number of issues already have been raised, to which I do not want to go to due to time, so that we also give opportunity for the others to raise their question or make their contribution. Dr. Frank Mohereza clearly did insist that the question of Karamoja is always on the move. The old issues stand and the new ones come in. And as a result, the solutions are not near because of the new issues that keep evolving. How long and to what extent will this journey go, since it keeps moving and changing endlessly, old one plus the new ones being added? Such a development challenge sometimes needs some levels of a solution so that we have human well-being. Two, there a lot of groups of people who have interest in Karamoja. As a result, certainly their cultures, and also they have a lot of influence. Other than the colonial and the post-colonial governments, we also have the missionaries who are the rulers in Karamoja. We have the civil society organizations who are rulers, who are influencing behavior and the people in Karamoja. And we now have the so-called investors who are rubbing shoulders with the missionaries and the local governments and all that. What is the influence of all these groups on the socio-economic and cultural development of Karamoja? Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Dr. Robert, kindly let's keep our comments or questions to 1.5 minutes, and we'll be taking 5 per round. Yes, John Owen.
Yes, Simon.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm live from South Sudan and participating live from South Sudan now. The question for Karamaja, like any other culture in Africa, is of interest to me and to any other person who intend to understand the dilemma within the questions of developments and the questions of civilizations. But to throw my question direct to Mr. Frank, I wanted to ask Mr. Frank whether the question of Karamoja is similar to the question of Turkana and the Dinka in South Sudan. And then I wanted to also understand from Dr. Kabito how much colonial, colonial administrations has really impacted on the life of Karamoja and its culture over time. And then going back again to Frank, I wanted Frank to distinguish whether the definition provided by the NRM is exactly the definitions that is going to be provided by the academicians like himself and any other person in the policy framework. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Owen. I will ask Aloysius Biaruanga to give his question or comment. 1 minute.
Thank you very much, moderator. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Thank
Loud
you.
and clear.
Yeah, I would like to give a comment or a guide. I think we could borrow a riff from Mwalimu Julius Nyerere when he was addressing a conference on adult learning. He said that you can help somebody to develop himself, but you cannot develop another person. Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you so much. I will ask Niyon Chuti Yoram. I hope I'm getting your name right.
Yes, you got my name properly. My name is Yoram. And my question is, what are we doing? What is the solution to the problem of Karamajong street kids? Because I see it is one of the on top of the problems that Dr. Kabito enumerated. I think for me, I caught social, and I can categorize the problem of Karamoja street children among the social problems, but we cannot talk about Karamoja without including the presence of a larger number of Karamoja children on the streets. What are we doing about that? What is the solution, longer-term solution to the getting off Karamajong children off the streets, especially in Kampala? I think on the streets of other cities of Uganda also, like Jinja and other cities. What are we doing? What should we do?
Okay, thank you so much, Yoram. I will ask our last person for this round, Samuel Kibi. Samuel?
Yes, thank you so much, moderator, and I'm so grateful. Mine is not a question, but it's just a recommendation. Yes, it's a recommendation. If it is already there, I would request that we have the same interaction for another time. And if it is taken up, I would request that maybe in our next discussion, we would invite some of the policymakers who are in the government to be part of this discussion, because it is really very interesting. The discussion is very rich, but how is this information reaching out to the policymakers? Because we are scholars, information is going out, but by the end of it, it may stop on me or you. Can we have NGO actors? Can we have government stakeholders to be part of this discussion? I'll be grateful if this can be there for the next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So the question to the panelists, I guess, is have the policymakers consumed your study, your research in some way, form, or shape? Okay, so these are the questions. Let's give each other 3 rounds, 3 minutes to give answers, 3 minutes each, so that we can have another round of Q&A. I think Muyeres have got more questions.
Yeah,
so
I did get more questions. Let me start with the one by Dr. Suruku. Thank you very much for the question. I think this is one of the things which keeps puzzling and disturbing for those who follow the Karamaja problematic. Problem is a moving target. When will it go on? I'm not suggesting that it will never end. Take the example of insecurity. On the 10th of July 2010, President Museveni declared that forceful disarmament had succeeded and that the absent state of Uganda had returned to Karamoja. We started enjoying peace. In those days, it was very difficult to move in Karamoja. Thereafter, everything was possible. Places that had not been reached, like Loyoro, those places in Natum Kale, places in Kamion, which were very, very difficult to reach because of crossing several risky wading corridors, were able to be reached with a lot of ease. So what happened? Along the way, the government removed the guns physically, forgot to disarm the mines of the Karamajong. The government tried to dismantle the tribal war machine through the disarmament process, collecting all guns, going after fortune tellers, and ensuring that the elders were in support to the processes that were going on. And they forgot about the socialization, the continuous recruitment of young ones into warriorhood. So as the old ones retire, there is a continuous replenishing of that tribal war machine through socializing children into warriorhood. So does it mean that the problem had not been tackled? I think it had. Anybody who was in Karamoja in the 90s understood the risks and the dangers, and that things changed significantly from 2010 to 2016, 2017. You solve one problem, you have to address and deal with another problem. So you need different strategies to deal with a complex problem involving different stakeholders coming on board at the same time, and understanding which is a primary problem and which one is a secondary problem.
Thank you. Please take a shot on other questions as well. There was a question on definitions by NRM, the question of stray children, and the question of policy.
South Sudan is the problem of the Karamajong similar to Turkana and the Dinka. I think in many ways, there are so many things around which they share in common in terms of mobility, seasonal tracking of available resources, but they are all affected by armed conflicts. and there is a significant proliferation of small arms and light weapons. All these communities have strong cultural tradition and the informal governance systems. So there's a lot that they share. But because they come from a completely different political context, there are certain things you cannot compare. The Dinka bear arms. The government has failed significantly to reduce the firearms. The Turkana bear firearms. The government has not disarmed them comprehensively as the Karamojong have. The Karamojong bear arms, but the government has comprehensively and significantly curtailed. You cannot walk with a firearm in the open in Karamoja. Amongst the Dinka, in Turkana, it is possible. So many things are similar and many things are not similar. Let me go to the question of the street children. I've always argued that the street children are the result of a crisis within the domestic economy occasioned by the nature of development, the way it is perceived and undertaken. Exporting labor is not a problem because there are Karamojong who left in the 70s, 80s, to look for livelihoods and employment elsewhere. There are Karamojong in Masindi, in Nakasongola, in Buganda, who have settled in Busoga, who have settled there. That was exporting male labor to go and look for employment. What is wrong with the kind of labor movement taking place now is of children and girls moving out of Karamoja to look for opportunities elsewhere. That is the result and the consequence of the crisis in the domestic economy, which cannot look after those who remained in the permanent settlement areas as people practiced livestock production through a very dynamic dry season permanent settlement system. It has been interfered with. It has, because of disarmament, because of raiding, because of drought and livestock diseases, the livestock available to people have reduced significantly, so the household cannot survive. The kids have come to town to look for employment, leja. Those who are able go and look for employment in the diaspora. So I think it is a crisis within the domestic economy.
But just Muera, just for you to answer us better on that one. There is one clear dynamic with the street kids problem, and that they mostly come from one district, and you know that one. So what is different?
I can explain.
I think the Honorable Woman MP from Napaka to answer this question.
I can explain, maybe the other person can come in. Napak, because during the initial disarmament, the people of Bokora were the first to surrender their weapons. They were thoroughly disarmed. They became extremely vulnerable. Raids from the Matheniko, from the Pian, and from the GA. That exposed that economy. Secondly, the majority of the people who left Karamoja in the 70s and the 80s were from Bokora. So they have these lessons about things which are better than in other parts of the country, better than here. So they attract many people. The problem is they are attracting children. They are push and pull factors. There is a lot of criminality involved because they are even human traffickers targeting these children innocent, luring people with money. The underlying problem which we need to come to terms with is the collapse of the local economy that supports, ensures household support children as well as other vulnerable categories.
Thank you, Frank. I'm having to cut your mic.
Sure.
And now over to Dr. Benedicto. We're running out of time.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think I should go to questions that Frank hasn't responded to. There's this question about how much the colonial administration impacted on the lives of local communities. It is on record and widely reported that the effect of the colonial administration on Karamoja was grave, and this was in the social, political, cultural, and economic ways. We are aware, for example, that with the arrival of colonialists and Karamoja having been hard to fight and subdue and control, there are many measures that were put in place to still benefit from Karamoja or to exercise some control until when they gave up. We are aware that there were policies over land usage and limitation of movements in the region, which saw over 90% of the land in Karamoja put under some limitations for use for the local population. They were changed to either be hunting ground, forest reserves, national parks, and of course of late, some of the land was channeled into being pacification zones or the Moroto barracks lately. That's only on land. We are aware that, as I indicated, that in the interest of course of control and limiting the number of cows under the excuse and disguise of fighting soil erosion, there was a government cattle buying scheme. And in this buying scheme, it was the government to determine the prices of cattle. So a head of cattle in Karamoja was 2.6 times less the amount of money it would cost in Uganda. And of course, even in Acholi, cattle was more expensive than in Karamoja. We are aware that during the Second World War, cattle that was providing food for the British Army was coming from Karamoja, cheaply bought and forcefully bought. We are aware that with the military occupation, 1911, with the coming of elephant hunters and ivory traders, in the names of, for example, he called himself, is it Karamoja? Bell, this was an elephant hunter who one day killed 9 elephants, and he reports himself, 1923, to have lived on 1,100 elephants that he killed in Africa. And many of those were killed in Karamoja. So Karamaja was deprived of its ecological resources. It was deprived of their social and economic livelihoods by being limited to dry areas. And of course, we're aware there is this company that was allowed to trade cattle in Karamoja. It was called the Fresh Foods Limited. In 1961 alone, it bought very cheaply 22,000 heads of cattle from the region. So the exploitation was real. We are aware that Karamoja is the only region in Uganda where over 40% of the male population was pushed into forced labor in Karamoja. We are aware that people were meant to adapt forcefully, settled life to be able to serve the colonial interests along the roads. I met an elder in Moroto whose father was forced into labor for 5 months, and he had not to go back home because he was mobilizing the rest to resist the colonial forced labor, and his people had to bail him out by carrying grass that touched the first hospital of Moroto. So the impact was real. It was cutting across. There is a question of, with all the investors, the missionaries, the colonialists, what were their contribution to the region?
Thank you.
Of course.
Can you answer that in a minute?
Yeah, in a minute. Their contributions were insignificant, if I may say, and to a large extent were negative, as I already mentioned, albeit for missionaries who are at least treasured or seen positively for having supported some individuals into education, for having provided health services, and they have been there long in thin and thick, and quite a number of them were killed along the highways when they are standing with the people during the raids and the insecurity times. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you so much, especially for addressing what I believe is the elephant in the room, this history of exploitation, abuse, and even extraction of resources in present-day Karamoja as a basis for violence and conflict. I would have asked Mwereza to comment on that, but maybe you, my participants, will. Samuel Chibi, your question in a minute.
Yes.
Yeah. Simon.
It is not a question, but as the last person, I wanted to appreciate Dr. Mwereza and Dr. Kabito for the very fruitful discussion and engagement. I want to be honest, it has really added something on our scholarly information. Thank you so much. Moderator, you are the best. May God bless you.
Thank you so much. Please don't go away. Joseph Buchana.
Yes, thank you very much, moderator. Mine is not a question, because I think it would be unfair to torment anybody with this, but rather I want to make a contribution to the analysis of the problem of Karamoja. And if it comes in the form of a question, that will only be for rhetoric purposes. I want to concur with Dr. Muhereza that the problem of Karamoja is fluid. You cannot just capture it. And also with Dr. Kabito, when he brings out that history, especially of exploitation. Now we have another thing that you, moderator, have just touched. You kind of stole my point. I'm joking. This current phenomenon, actually the exploitation of Karamoja continues, and now it is in terms of natural resources. So Karamoja being endowed by natural resources is now a problem for it, because people are flocking there. A lot are buying land and buying it very cheaply, and they're going there to mine, and they're going there to buy land where they think there might be a mine, so that later on when they have to sell it, they sell it expensively. So this is the continuing exploitation, but at the same time, which adds to the complexity of the problem of Karamoja, and it makes it very tricky and difficult to capture. Just a contribution so that when we are discussing Karamoja, we factor in such contemporary issues like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Loupa to ask his question in a minute.
Thanks. I have thank you to Benito and to Frank. And of course, I'm really very happy to join this discussion. I thank Frank for ever saying what went wrong, every time what went wrong. He did a lot, but what went wrong. So what I think what is missing out is that from what went wrong is that government knows what went wrong. The government knows what went wrong. Secondly, the neighborhood policy did not settle. So government did not settle the neighborhood policy. You mentioned South Sudan is open, Turkana is open, but we did not disarm them because we are accessing the firearms from them, and this is an opportunity open to criminals. Then the other third thing is that we used a stick and a carrot, but we withdrew a carrot at a later stage that again left us exposed. And then the other is that we disarmed Karamoja livestock, and the plan is to disarm Karamoja its livestock, and that's where we are heading to. We are ready to let our animals go, and we shall restock, no problem. And then there is a plan for forced education, and this is being proposed. And if this plan is to work out, I think we shall also be creating another problem. The allied problem is coming up. We are there, we are coming. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Loupa. I think if I get you right, you mean that someone is trying to steal Karamaja cows when you say disarm Karamaja of cows.
Yes, Simon. That's okay. What I'm meaning. Someone is disarming us, our cattle, and we are ready to give them, but we shall get from them by force.
Okay, and the moving target continues in the words of Frank Muhereza. Christine, please. May you, trying to ask you to unmute. I'm not succeeding. Christine, we are not getting you because you're on mute. I cannot unmute you. I don't know why that is. Okay, yes, Christine. Christine, we can now get you.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Simon. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Tabiso and I know that researchers who have done the Karamoja question. What I want to also is not that it cannot be handled by only the researchers. If we all come and we combine efforts and we do a lot of research, like someone said that.
Christine, I am having to mute you. We are not getting you clearly. Sorry, Christine. Sorry, Christine. William Musamba. Yes, William.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. My question goes to Dr. Muhereza. What is your take on the current Karamoja-Teso boundary conflicts as a development specialist? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that straightforward question. Dr. Spire.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Mheres and Kavito, but mine is not really a question for now. What I had for a question was already put in the chat, but I'm just requesting that we disable the chat so that other ideas and discussions that cannot come through by word can be typed in the chat section. Thank you.
The chat is active, Doctor. I see that it's active. I hope no one has denied you those rights. Okay, Senyimba Joel, you'll be the last one for the evening.
Okay, good evening. This is so surreal to me that I'm here to discuss with you.
Not written. I just told them.
Okay, I guess you're hearing me.
Yes, we are getting you.
Okay, I wish to suggest that this goes to Dr. Muhereza. What is his take on if I suggested that the people of Karamoja also be armed with arms to subject or counteract their neighbors that bring in arms in the effort or in the pursuit to steal their cattle, to rob them of their cattle. What is his take? Also, what is his take on the word he used, street children? Couldn't he also say that children that find themselves on the street, because that bothers me a little bit. Thank you so much. Calling them as children that street children, couldn't we call them children that find themselves on the street?
Language again is everything. Yeah, I think Dr. Spire might be triggered with by that one. Someone seriously wants a court to say something, and we have not had many women expressing interest. Christine, may you disable your video so that your bandwidth can be given a chance? Christine, may you disable your video as Dr. Spire reacts to that? I see his hand is up.
Yes, sorry, I didn't hear that. What was the question addressed to me?
Why call them street children or street babies even, yet you could say children who find themselves on the street?
Well, I think it's a matter of
semantics and context issue.
Yeah, if these children find themselves on the streets, then they become street children. I think changing that vocabulary might not solve the problem. We might be engaged in political correctness, but we know that solving it requires something else, except if we were to say that that kind of nomenclature is derogatory, that it somehow undermines the humanity of these children, which I don't think is really the spirit behind calling them street children. In fact, that name itself should make us uncomfortable about the fact that anyone should be on the streets. I deliberately used the name street babies. Yes, I know that some children, even babies, are children, but just to bring out the gravity of the problem, that many of these that we see on streets of Kampala are actually babies. You even see what you would still call toddlers carrying babies. And I don't think in any place in the world, people would still remain comfortable seeing babies who cannot even crawl on the street. Some are laid there on the side as others are begging. And the fact that this has moved on for about 10 years and beyond, and it continues, we drive past in huge cars with children rights, labels on them. I think this should be a challenge that we should speak more closely to, beyond asking whether they should be called street children or children who find themselves on the street. But my question was also on the side of the politics of it. Many of us seem to be looking at the fact that maybe Karamoja, with all its problems, these children are deprived. That's how they end up on the streets. But is it just about the deprivation? There are these stories of them being used by other people, that begging itself is becoming some sort of a business. They are just are deployed by others to beg on their behalf. They do not even benefit from the begging, if we were to call that a benefit. I've not heard anyone speak to that angle. I don't know whether it's still speculative or there is no evidence to use to speak to it. But I think this should be central to any discussion of livelihoods in Karamoja. Now that we say these children are not only in Kampala, they are almost in every city. Yeah, it's really disturbing. Thank you. But that said, my chat is still disabled. I don't know whether the problem is only on my side.
I think it's only on yours.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Doctor. I will ask Christine to have a chance. Yeah. Christine. Christine.
Hey, Simon.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought you had muted me so much.
No, you can now make your question or comment.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Kabito and Dr. Muhereza for raising these issues on the Karamoja question. I know that there's a lot of research that has taken place, but you know that as Karamoja, we've had a lot of issues. And other issues, if they are not handled by government, then we shall still keep on lagging behind, and it will still remain a Karamoja question. So it's just a matter of bringing the policymakers, the decision makers, so that we can handle this issue of Karamoja, so that it can get to the level of the other parts of the country. Thank you.
Yes, Christine. Thank you for that. Another lady has her hand up, Monica Turinda.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Monica, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Okay, can I go now? Can I speak?
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I would like to appreciate each and everyone who has been sharing knowledge on Karamoja. I'm a young scholar as well, so mine wouldn't be as mature as some of the discussion that we had today. But for me, I have something that is eating up my brain, literally, like well, I've had colleagues here speaking about government, and I believe yes, it has a hand to play. It has a hand to do with most of the things that happen in the country, and also the cultural aspect that we know about Karamoja. But now, for me, I wanted to find out the development ideas that that go to Karamoja. I don't know if people are involved or if they just think somewhere and just take them to Karamoja without involving people, because that's one way where we can have progress or make steady progress in having something implemented in a community. For instance, a colleague of us here was talking about Napak, the decent Napak, where actually they have a possibility of farming. But again, I've gone to Karamoja several times, but I don't see crops there. I don't see food. Yeah. So I'm wondering whether we just sit here and whether we sit and just think for them, or if they have been involved. Of course, our discussants here who have been there could already be running through their minds saying this and that. But I would like to know, because I was born and the Karamoja issue was there, and it is still there. And I know government has taken very many programs there. I know that also very many NGOs have been there. So is it that the people are not involved? They are forced into these things? What is the issue? I'm sorry if I missed it. And once again, thank you for the opportunity. Over.
Yes, unfortunately, I cannot take any more participants because we need to have get this to a wrap. With the last question, and I think that's the only question from the last round, I think the best person to take that head on as he makes his concluding remarks in 2 minutes, 2 minutes sharp, Dr. Muereza.
Thank you very much. Caption this: some of the best marble which is available on the market in Uganda and could be probably in many places is coming from Moroto. Does anybody know how much money the people at Sunbelt, I hear Operation Wealth Creation Project, is making out of that marble? We have Karamoja that is unable to feed its children, and the marble that is selling like, you know, the best marble which is being sold on the international market. I think we have an element of greed here. Supposing we committed that a certain amount of money, forget about royalties. These royalties never even come. When they come, they get lost at the sub-county. If they reach, most of it remain at the district. And we committed and said, let the profits for 1 year marble be given to improving the livelihood of Karamoja. It would change. But somebody wants to get a lot of money and a lot of money so they can't even know how much they are sleeping in their mattresses, while the people where this marble is being mined continue to wallow in poverty. That seems to be the law of economics, but we can change these laws. We are human beings, we can change, you see, and stop, you know, people sleeping angry when you have millions of dollars being made out of manufacturing of marble. Let me just leave it up to there for you to decipher.
Okay, thank you. Just 60 seconds, Frank Muereza, your last parting statement.
I love Kabito. I love the way he writes. I enjoy reading his work. I've been following what he writes. I'd like to have another discussion which is not on Zoom. I cannot read his body language on Zoom. I hope this is the first in series of debates that are going to take place. There are so many things we need to speak about, smaller debates around topical issues. Let this not be the last. I would love to come to Umai. I would like you to come to CBR so we can continue this discussion. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for that. Cassie is taking notes. 2 minutes, Dr. Benedicto.
Thank you very much, Simon. I thank everyone who has been part of this. Getting back to that last question that Jerez has tried to focus on, I think the problem is double-sided. And part of the problem is from within Karamoja, and part of the problem is from without. Jerez has highlighted just one aspect of the from without. 2015, while in Moroto, a woman concerned, upon seeing a fleet of cars that brought evaluators from Kampala to come and evaluate the progress and monitoring the progress of some projects in Karamoja. And she noted that Karamoja is the only region where of $1 billion, 200 million will be for implementation, 800 will be for monitoring and evaluation. And evaluators are from without this region. So even for the projects, whether by civil society or by government, it is clearly known even less than a half of those resources go to the people they are intended to. The second problem, I'm a person who believes that if you make yourself one person less of the problem, then the world is one person less of the problem. I happen to have somewhere I work in Karamoja. Karamoja has potential. And this is a problem that leaders and elites of the region have to embrace. I know many elites, upon education, upon getting good jobs, they hardly go back home. That way, they are creating a gap between them, the elites, and the communities back home. Yet it should be these elites to provide the architectural, technical, and social support that people on the ground can embrace to do some productive work. There are sections of Karamoja that are fertile, that can provide food. So
thank you so much, Benedicto. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. 1 minute, parting shots.
I'm grateful to the organizers of this interface. I'm grateful to Dr. Muhereza for the willingness for us to talk on and for your commitment to the cause of the region. That's not an embrace many Ugandans, well, not Karimajongs, have taken. I implore you for that. And for everybody who has been part of this exercise, check out the message. The question of Karamoja is a question of every Ugandan, is a question about humanity. Thank you.
Yeah, and I hope David can send us the PowerPoint that you prepared for this. And whereas are your notes, please do kindly send to David for sharing.
Simon, Simon, I think the issue of the chats is widely a problem. Many people are complaining to me that they are not able to send their chats as well. And that has disadvantaged them.
I don't know why. Maybe the technical people might be knowing why, might know why. So I do not know from my end. Sorry about that. Yeah, so from me, before I hand over to David, in 60 seconds, thank you very much. I benefited a lot from this conversation and understanding deeper your work. It was really a pleasure being your moderator. I hope again, but also all of them work for me. Yeah, so Benedicto, I'll WhatsApp you some of those hard questions to maybe even think about it, and maybe even write the next paper on it. So immensely grateful. Thank you very much to you, David Ngendo.
Thank you so very much, Simon Peter. We are 3 minutes on top of the hour, and this is just a beginning of our curfew time for those who are using border borders to their places of work. I really want to thank everyone who has put up against many odds to really partake of this conversation. I only hope that from where we are at the Center for African Study, your internet bundles have not been wasted. I hope it has been a worthwhile sacrifice. And as we conceived it, of course, this was the Karamoja question to help us even get to the reformulation of the question. How do we get the question right is actually at the heart of our endeavors. And this debate series is basically about getting the question right. It was said in the debates that, well, where are the policy actors and the policy influencers to benefit, to profit from the wealth of insights and the wealth of knowledge which is being shared here? Of course, our modest contribution is that this is being recorded. It is also live. It is streaming live on YouTube. we hope that there is some ripple effect beyond these 2 hours we have shared together, that someone somewhere online will definitely stumble on this link on YouTube, and it will continue to have an impact. But that is as modest as we can make it. We also hope that every single one of us who has attended, at some point we're closer to 100 on the call, they have some space where they can actually push a button and make the change that is required. And we don't take humanities and its presence for granted. We only hope that the agency will magnetize to become power and to change the course of action. There was a question about what is the ambition here? What is the ambition in holding such and other related debates like this? As our debaters fluently put it, the Karamoja question definitely is the Ugandan question, is also a humanity question, but it's a question of it's a question that interests all of us in our different fields of inquiry, our different policy concerns, our different ambitions. It's the question that if we demarginalize a group of people, then we are already in many ways decolonizing our past and enlarging our potential for the better future. And we hope that we have really achieved our ambition. For us in CAS, we are selling yeast, and we expect that many will make the bread out of this yeast. We promise you that we are not going to tire. There will be a 3rd episode as we come to the new year, and please keep the interest high. Keep the interest high and keep the suggestion coming. We really apologize for the mishap, and Zoom has given us a great deal of convening power to do a lot of things with less resources, but it's also given us a lot of challenges with the demand it has. And we apologize for the charts, which has been disabled for so many, including myself. It's a mishap we did not envisage, but we are going to take also these questions very seriously and relay the conversation beyond this time to those to whom it most concerns. Thank you so very much. Once again, I really want to thank the moderator for putting up a very interesting show and sustaining the appetites up until now. It is a minute past 6 from me and from my colleagues who are really behind the scene quietly, who have really put up a lot of energies and a lot of thought to it. Professor Jimmy Spire Sentongo, Robina and Caro, my colleagues, and the entire management of Uganda Matters University that allows us the confidence to carry on with this dream of a scholarship beyond the classroom. We thank you all, and we hope that this time around we are moving toward an African center, which is for African and about Africans. Thank you, and have a good evening, and have a good rest of the day from wherever you are tuning in.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Great. Bye for now.